I want to talk about something personal, those sudden, painful muscle cramps. It's a frustrating struggle that I've been dealing with, and I know that many of you have the same problem. This started for me back in 2021. I was out shopping, and when I got back to my car, my foot just kind of locked up in a terrible cramp, and it's been happening to me ever since. It's happening in our feet, our calves, and I have one client in my community who talks about it happening in our hands. They lock up every morning. We've all heard the guesses, right? Maybe it's hormones, but today I want to get to the bottom of what's really going on. Now, to help us get the real answers, I've invited Dr. Tony Hampton. He's an expert in helping people to understand their bodies, and I can't wait to finally ask him. So, Tony, what is causing this problem?
Thank you again for just having me here. And you are not alone. There are so many people, including myself, who've, suffered from cramps. And I've gone from low carb keto to carnivore. And to be honest with you, I wasn't taking a lot of electrolytes. I was doing fine. But I hear in the community, there are a lot of people who have issues with cramps. So you're not alone, and it's not uncommon that it sneaks up on you later. So every dietary pattern has its limitations, right? And it's not a negative limitation. It's just a limitation that you need to problem solve for, right? So with this low carb, keto, or carnivore dietary pattern, sometimes you get a little bit of a perfect storm. And it starts with the electrolytes being off, which we just spoke to. Your motor neurons become more excited. And then there's a need to recover. And sometimes when you're not recovering from those electrolytes being off, things tense up. And we think about muscle and nerves, it's all an electrical pathway. It's just like your heart when we shock it, right? So when things misfire, your body shifts into a cramp. It's just not happy. And it will recover, but it doesn't recover in that moment when it happens. So when you have a low carb diet, this is really important. And most people get this. We lower insulin. And there's something called natriuresis, which is when your body holds on to salt and water. So that's a renal thing that's happening. So, but the bottom line is you're ultimately, you're going to lose sodium in your urine. And we have this renal angiotensin aldosterone system. It's this complex hormonal system in our bodies that regulate blood pressure and fluid balance. So you get an increase in aldosterone, and then your body senses sodium is low, and then the blood volume drops. And if you think about it, if the blood volume drops, that's one of those things that keto flu is related to. You start to feel lightheaded and dizzy. But the adrenals say, hey, I can fix this. I'll produce more aldosterone that'll help you hold on to salt. But trying to get all of those things balanced is very difficult. Oh, by the way, when this happens, the aldosterone is also going to do something else. It's going to affect your potassium. So now your potassium is trying to keep up with the sodium loss. And then you lose potassium. So it gets really confusing. So the bottom line is, to help your body out when all of these things are happening, it's a good idea for some people, not all, to think about supplementing with electrolytes. Now, it may mean for me and you, when it didn't happen at first, we were getting enough sodium in our diet, we were doing fine. But it just seems like over time, as you really get into this, particularly for me as a carnivore, the needs go up. Think about Dr. Paul Saladino. He's a surfer. He's losing way more salt than any of us. I don't surf. I'm here in Chicago, right? So his needs are higher, and I think that's why some people may struggle. Now, one caveat is that women tend to have other issues that are going on. So when they're going through menopause, the menopause itself can cause estrogen to swing. And there's a hormone called vasopressin that deals with sodium. And when that hormone gets off, things can also be impacted because vasopressin vasopressin stimulates the reabsorption of water in the kidneys. And when you have water coming into the kidney, it can dilute the urine concentration of sodium. And then your body's like, because you're gonna start losing sodium in your urine. So women actually lose more sodium than men just because they have this estrogen thing affecting this vasopressin hormone. There's a lot of things going on in the body when you're making these dietary changes. And that's after years of doing something completely different. So, and then imagine hot flashes. You're losing sodium, you're losing water. So now you're shifting your fluids with that as well. So I think that women tend to have more issues because their hormones are shifting and men don't have to deal with that. That affects their sleep. And when your sleep's affected, that's going to affect your neuromuscular thresholds. In other words, when the neurons fire, so disrupted sleep, perimenopausal, vasopressin, all these hormones working, they should be working together, but they're more complex in a woman, and that's why they may struggle. And that's kind of what you want to think about. You want to realize there's things going on in your body that you're trying to mitigate. And that's why you could argue that maybe a woman who starts to have symptoms is a person who needs to think about electrolytes. Like we have keto chows capsules in our home. We don't do anything with flavors because I can't tolerate like any type of artificial sugars and things like that. And we keep them at home, not to be used necessarily every day, but if we find that people in the home are starting to have issues, we just use electrolytes. We make sure we salt our foods thoroughly, and then that's kind of how we handle things when this occurs.
First of all, I want to say just to describe my last few years, but but I want to ask, like, if I would just take salt,
Hmm.
my cramp would like lessen much more quickly. So that's the first thing
Yeah.
I noticed. But the other thing that I'm going to say, the first time it happened, I was out and about. It was a hot day and I was running about a lot. So like it's interesting that you say the sweating because well then you have the whole menopause thing and yes, I've entered into that stage. So is it possible that this electrolyte imbalance and the fact that my hormones are changing, if I feel like that's what you're telling me is happening, kind of coincides, it seems to me, with like the salt that I put on my meat has gone up and up and up over time. I've noticed that. Like my spouse cannot take the amount of salt that I put on my food. Like we're so different in that way. But the new question I have is since going carnivore, which has been the last 2 years, the cramps are still there. I kind of thought going carnivore would help them alleviate. However, the thing that you just said that kind of sparked a thought in my head is, well, when I went carnivore, I didn't just remove the vegetation, I removed the spices. Most spices come with extra salt. I'm wondering if that might be why I'm still like struggling with this because I kind of accidentally removed some of the salt too. Please subscribe.
Yeah, the salt is so important. And when you're chronically, I mean, some people worry about when you're chronically low on insulin, then you become insulin resistant, right? And your body's ability to respond to changes in electrolytes is going to be different because over time, maybe you do become a little insulin resistant. So when it's chronically low, and your kidneys, they're gonna hold on that insulin, which is gonna really, that low insulin is gonna really make it harder and harder for you to have enough sodium. So in those, when you're at that, when you're going through that, I think over the long haul, you're probably dumping sodium a little bit more aggressively. Not to mention the aldosterone renin thing that's going on. When that's a little off, those pathways are off, you're going to find that not only are you going to need to replace the salt, but you may have symptoms. You may feel more fatigue, tight muscles, dizziness, and increased cortisol, tension. All of that stuff's going to become a problem. So it is, but it does seem to be true that people who have been doing this longer are finding that they have to increase their salt intake. Now, what does that look like? I mean, we're talking about 5 to 6 grams of sodium, which is a lot. I mean, if you think about the recommendations, it's probably more in the 1 to 2.5 grams. And now we're talking about 5 to 7, that's a lot of salt, and that's kind of hard. And that's why for you, it doesn't seem to be a big deal because your body needs it. Where with your husband, he doesn't seem to need it. And then obviously your palate gets kind of, partly because you need it, but your palate gets used to that and it doesn't bother. So, and I kind of have the same thing in my house. My wife's more keto, I'm more carnivore. So it seems like my salt needs are higher than hers, and I tolerate more salt than she does. So now, not to mention, you got to factor in what else am I doing? Am I exercising more? I work with a trainer twice a week. So as I've worked with my trainer, I've noticed that my need for salt is higher. My need to consider electrolytes are higher because now I literally worked out with her yesterday. So now I'm exercising more, I'm sweating more, and all of that is going to then lead to a higher need for sodium because I'm increasing my sodium loss. So it's really important that we look at all of these things, and then you need to balance that with the magnesium and potassium, which is really important because if you don't balance all of those electrolytes, you may find that just doing salt by itself is not enough. So rather that's putting magnesium cream or oil on your legs at night in areas that are strategic, the areas that tend to be impacted, versus just making sure you're salting enough. So it's a very a complex system. And I think that's what a lot of people are experiencing in the low carb community is that they're trying, it's like a little bit of an experiment, and everybody is different because everybody has like different lifestyle, different needs. Some people are under eaters and they need to eat more protein. Some people are under more stress. Some people like myself are working with a trainer. Some people are female and they're going through menopause. And when you're going through menopause, you're going to you're going to have more of a need than maybe the person who's not. So it is a very complex scenario where you have to kind of do this experiment, and you have to say, well, let me first get up to the right amount of salt. Let me do 5 to 7 grams, and that's 2 to 3 teaspoons. If you start to translate it to two teaspoons, am I really getting that? Am I really serving my body in that way? And I think that's the type of stuff you have to do to experiment. And you hope that with that experimentation, you're okay. Sometimes you're still not okay. And another thing I want to say out loud is there are things that we have to think about beyond diet, right? So we have to be careful not to get so caught up in like, is it just the diet, and say, is there anything else going on? And when you think that way, you start to say, okay, maybe I need to test something else. And that's going to be a big part of how we should think about this too. And that's a doctor thinking, I'm always thinking, is there something wrong? Yeah.
So I don't have any of the other symptoms you said. It's just the cramps. I'm not
Yeah.
fatigued.
Right.
I'm able. My concentration is amazing. Like I'm good, except for once in a while I'm getting the cramps. But to your point of the sweating, I think like we forget how many different ways our body has to eliminate.
That's right.
It comes out in our breath. It comes out in our sweat. Right. So it's not just bathrooming. It's how our body eliminates. And I feel like sometimes I'm not thinking about that as much as maybe I should be.
Hmm.
So yes, I can manage the salt because I can put more and actually it tastes better to me, so that's easy for me to do. What I'm not sure about, like you talk about magnesium, is there a food way? So are there certain meats or fish or whatever that I can have more of that's going to help me with magnesium and potassium? Like I do know that different meats and poultry and fish have different levels of what? Is there something people should be focusing on in terms of that? Just if there is a way to do it without taking something, I'm such a fan of that because I'll be honest with you, I just don't trust companies and they say there's
Right.
only X or Y and I don't trust. I would rather get it from food if I can. So are there meats that you would recommend that are higher in these things or even can we do that with eggs? I'm not sure.
So the first thing is, which foods are high in magnesium. For me, I think about like ruminant meats first, and many people in the low carb community understand ruminant meat is better because it's more bioavailable in terms of you got a lot of fat in it. So the magnesium and things like that are going to be a little bit more bioavailable and more tolerated because that fat to protein ratio is ideal. I love Dr. Boz because she's always talking about sardines. So she's a huge fan of sardines. It's got the omega-3, but it also has a ton of magnesium. So I think that's a good way to go. I'll probably be eating some egg yolks this morning. So I'll be eating a ton of eggs. And when you eat eggs, you can absolutely get it that way as well. Uh, if you're keto and I'm more carnivore, things like pumpkin seeds are high. I drink bone broth almost every day because I have an irritable bowel history. So for me, that helps a ton. And it also soothes my gut, but it also gives me magnesium. Now, when it comes to potassium, I think the ruminant meats are also a good source because they're better absorbed in that as well. For those who are keto, like in the lane you're in, I think avocados are very helpful because they tend to have a ton of potassium. One of the things I have with a conversation with my patients often is this, banana question. I eat bananas because of the potassium, but I always remind them that avocados are probably just as much, if not more. I don't eat enough seafood, so I do supplement with omega-3, but salmon tends to be pretty high in potassium as well. And for those who can tolerate liver, oh my God, beef liver is a great source. So I think if you think about this in the context of food, magnesium, potassium with the right foods, if it's enough, and you have to make sure you eat enough of these things, and then you can salt your food with a quality salt to get the sodium part up. So that's kind of how I would frame it. But you're right. Listen, when I did the creatine video recently, I kind of suggested that 3 to 5 grams of creatine for those who are trying to build muscle is hard to get in your diet. And there are times with this dietary pattern where people may struggle to get enough magnesium and potassium, so they may still need to supplement. But you always start with the fork, and then you move on to other ways to deal with this issue. So that's kind of how I would look at it.
I do find that interesting because the one thing that I have an issue with is ruminant meats. So, because of my thalassemia. So, maybe that's another reason that I keep getting the cramps because I really can't
You can't do it.
tolerate them at all, like at all. So, um, I'm just wondering about that. Like, I'm kind of thinking out loud too. The other
That's
thing,
crazy. I hate to hear that.
sorry?
How long have you noticed that?
So, I was diagnosed when I was in my pregnancy, so
Okay.
33. But I had always noticed it. So, I noticed it when I was 18. And I mean, I got confirmation. I shouldn't say I noticed it. Throughout my childhood, red meat was the one meat my parents and I fought about. Anything else on my plate, I ate it. Red meat, like it was a real fight. And when I was 33 and I got diagnosed, it all made sense because as soon as I turned
Mhm.
18, I stopped eating it. I was just like, this makes me I don't feel good when I eat it. I just stopped eating it. So I'm not really sure how I would then I can't do ruminants. So, but I do think pork and chicken and all the others, they do have some of these minerals, obviously, because every animal has them. So it's just I'm not getting the abundance that is what you're saying as I would get. So maybe sardines would be something for me to have more of. I don't
Yeah.
have them very often. I've been trying to. I did find them fresh because I don't want to take them canned. So I did find a source to get them not in a can. So I'll
Hmm.
add that to my rotation. That's very interesting to know. And the other question I had actually was, why does taking iodine seem to help? That's another thing that is
Yeah.
that a hormone thing or
Yeah, it is weird. I again, this is why I like doing live streams because a lot of times people will bring up things that are like, huh, that's weird. And I've had this problem and maybe I heard on a podcast that something like that will help. So just as a baseline, iodine supports your synthesis of those thyroid hormones, like T4, which converts to T3 to active form. So if a person has a fairly level um, thyroid level, we call it being euthyroid, your your nerve conduction is going to be better. Your ability to make mitochondria ATP, and of course, if your ATP is not working well, that may increase your risk for cramps. even how your muscles relax is going to be more efficient if your thyroids are not off. So it's kind of an indirect effect, but it does matter. So, so the question is, this is not for everybody. Like some people do just fine, don't have to worry about it, where other people do. And the people who do are people who don't tolerate cold. Like I'm recording in my basement and it's cooler. Some people can't tolerate cool air. People who are having issues with their hair loss, people who are constipated, low energy, those people, when you add iodine back, which will then support your thyroid, may find that they do better down the road. And so when that occurs, a lot of my patients will say, well, let me try this iodine 150 micrograms a day, see how it helps. Some people even take selenium with it, 100 to 200 micrograms, because that'll also help to mitigate how those two things work together, and then go from there. So, since I'm a doctor, I tend to test. So I think since iodine is a thyroid thing, and the thyroid thing can then lead to problems with muscle contraction, I always want to do a full thyroid panel on these folks. I want to do a TSH, free T4, free T3, thyroid antibodies, reverse T3, all of the thyroid panel tests that would be more thorough. A TSH by itself is probably not going to be uh, the thing. So I think in general, if we were to say one thing, we'd say if the iodine is working well and you're at the right level, your thyroid will be working very well, and you probably are less likely to get cramps. But there is an association there that people need to be aware of, and that's why that works in some people, but not all people, as a way to mitigate the negative effects of the low iodine in your body.
Out of curiosity, is it possible to take too much iodine? Like, okay, because
Always.
one of the
Yeah.
things that I'm wondering about is that we're not really like whenever people talk about iodine, I've heard Elizabeth Bright talk about it. I've heard Dr. Barry talk about it. I've heard a lot of different people talk about it, but they don't really say how much.
Right.
And when we buy Ludol's iodine, I think is what it's called, or any
Hmm.
other, and I mean that scares me too because some of these other iodines don't seem to be for consumption. So you can go online and like the bottle that's for consumption and the one that's not for consumption don't look that different.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to know like how could I know if I was taking too much?
Well, the good thing is you can definitely, there are labs that you can actually take. So you can actually have your labs checked just to be safe. And, but as when I talk to patients, I kind of tell them there's an upper safe limits of normal, and that's probably in the 500 to 1,000 range micrograms per day. But most people should not be at that level. You should really be at 150 micrograms a day, and and if it's beyond that, that's problematic. But the bottom line is, if you if you have too much iodine, you can actually overstimulate the thyroid, and you can get thyroid inflammation, and you can get like a hyperthyroid state. And you'll know that by being anxious, having palpitations, won't tolerate heat, the opposite of the cold, having sleep issues, weight loss issues. It can also impact people negatively who have things like Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune thyroid condition. It can actually cause a flare for those people. And then obviously, the thyroid can fuel thyroid tissue growth. So if you have too much iodine, you can actually get thyroid nodules and things like that. So there are some safety concerns, but there are labs that you can do to kind of see where you are. So if you start at 150, though, most people will do okay. If you're working with a doctor and you have thyroid conditions, you should probably work with them while you're doing that, because I think it's a little riskier. But if you're just an average person just trying to supplement, like I think, like I mentioned, Keto Chow's capsules for electrolytes, they also have a minerals supplement with Dr. Kim Berry's face on it. And that supplement does have iodine and a few other the minerals that typically we may be at risk for, losing. So I just think that again, this is going back to this idea of doing experiments. You have to kind of trust but verify. And so if you're having issues or you're concerned, you say, okay, so you can kind of start this journey and say, I'm just going to take minerals and electrolytes and not worry about it. And then it's kind of like taking a multivitamin. Or you can say, let me see how I do, and then I'll start doing things based on how I'm feeling. And that's another way to take it. Now that's easier for more sophisticated people, but I think for the layperson who's getting started, it may be more complicated because how do you know you're having symptoms of something? It's like it gets really complicated. But I do think that these are great questions because we try to problem solve. That's kind of my job, is to see where people struggle and then problem solve. The good news is that 80% of the people in front of me end up not having any issues. They just kind of they change their diet and everything goes pretty smoothly. So that's the good news. The bad news is, what about that 10% that's struggling? And that's kind of how you want to think about this.
I feel like that's part of the problem that for me, right? Because what happens is you have such a huge improvement and then you live like I did for 3 years with everything amazing, and then something shows up. And I'll be honest, I didn't initially think keto or carnivore problem, because I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
carnivore at the time, so keto problem. I more thought weird something happening. But my now new issue is that whenever this comes up, you've got that world out there that doesn't want us doing keto,
Mm-hmm.
and they're to come in and say, no, you need to add back your sugar and you should be eating fruit and all this craziness. And it's like, I feel like the other thing I want you to talk to is this, because I've heard so many different places. Well, women can't fast. Women can't do carnivore. I mean, I've been carnivore for 2 years now. The only and nothing has changed. I still have the cramps, so it's not like they went away, but they haven't gotten worse. They're the same. Once in a blue moon it happens. So I do feel like it's unfortunately dangerous right now for keto, that it's the common talk is, well, if you add back some carbs you're going to have less cramps, but unfortunately I don't see that as being true either, because keto people have cramps. So unless you get yourself all the way back up to the point where you're not doing it anymore, but then if your cramps go away but your health is deteriorating again, I don't see that as better. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and especially that they target the women in the house. I'll give you my opinion. I think they do it because we're the ones that cook. And if we're eating off plan, everybody in the house is going to end up eating off plan. But are there other reasons that they target us?
Well, I think it goes back to the fact that it's the hormones are the issue, right? So they target women because the hormones are more complex, I would argue, in women. Now, the good news is hormones are made from cholesterol and fat, not from dietary glucose, right? So it wouldn't be logical to then say to a woman, oh, it's the carbs, just add back carbs. I think that for women, it comes down to not having adequate protein and fat, because you need a little protein to help work, to help be the foundation of the hormones. But more importantly, the fat and the cholesterol is what all the hormones are made of. So for women, start with protein and fat. And then, since women are told in society not, small plates and things like that, make sure you're getting sufficient calories. I find that when I have patients in front of me, women are the ones who may not get sufficient calories compared to their male counterparts. And then, going back to what we talked about already, what about the electrolytes and the minerals? Let's focus on that. And then we go to my nest, my nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, how we think. What about your stress? Because women run the household. They are two of our president for Wisconsin for Advocate Healthcare is a woman. Our president for a couple of our hospitals on the south side of Chicago are women. Women have a lot of stress, and then they got to go home and do stuff. So I just find that let's make sure the stress is okay. Let's make sure the quality of the sleep is okay. And since carbs and sugar are not the building blocks of any of these things, you got to fix those things first. That does not mean that there aren't examples of people who may benefit from adding carbs strategically, right? So if I'm a under eater and I'm in a high stress environment, my cortisol is high, my sleep is not great, in that setting, would it make sense for that person who can find strategic carbs that fit them? Like, most carbs don't make me feel well because of my bodybuilding, or my irritable bowel issue. So I don't really do well with carbs in general. But if I'm in a situation where I'm high stress and under eating, maybe in that you could argue, maybe if I'm really intense about working out, I'm a heavy exerciser, maybe in that situation, or maybe because I'm not sleeping well and it seems like at the end of the day, a little strategic carb may help. But for most of us, we should not resort to carbs as the solution because it's not really getting to the root cause. The root cause is protein, fat, cholesterol. Start with that, and then we move on. And then there's going to be a few. There's always outliers. So if we have 100 people having this conversation, there's going to be about 5%, 10% who we call outliers. And those outliers may find that their body doesn't perform as well on a stricter carb reduction dietary pattern, particularly carnivore, but that's only 10%. So we don't want the noise you hear in the carnivore community, how some long-term, carnivores are adding carbs back. That doesn't necessarily define the entire community. And in their particular situation, we need to say that maybe for them, strategic addition of carbs is okay, but it's definitely not the majority, and it's got to be individualized. And some people, when they do that, they'll say, well, maybe once a week I'll have an indulgence, and if for some reason that's enough for them. So I just don't think for most of us that'll be our path. But you'll know because you'll do the experiment trying to fix everything else. And if it's just not getting fixed, you have to then ask yourself, is there a way for me to strategically add back a carb as a way to mitigate why I'm still struggling? So it's complicated, Violet. It's complicated because it's not a one size fits all. And that's why the experiment will continue.
I definitely love the idea of paying attention to what I'm doing and seeing like what's impacting me. My only concern right now, so I have a few concerns from what you just said. And the first one being, I find that when women are spoken to and we focus on this idea of calories, because we come from this place of less calories is healthier, it blurs what we're trying to help them understand. So when
Hmm.
I took my mind away from calories, because Dr. Fung taught me that our body doesn't understand that. So why are we talking about that? When I took my
Hmm.
mind away from calories and started talking about grams of sugar, grams of protein, grams of fat,
Hmm.
then all of a sudden it made more sense because of like for the amount of weight that I wanted. So what the weight that my healthy body is supposed to be at, there's an amount of protein. There's an amount that protein I should be aiming at per day. And I wonder why like we don't talk in those terms more, because then it's very clear for the woman in front of you and you can look at her and say, well, we're aiming at this healthy body size for you. And it's ish, right? Like if you're a little bit above it or a little bit below it is not, we're aiming at something, but then it gives her a gram of protein count to aim at, which then we can actually be looking at and saying, so did I get, so in my case, I eat about a pound of meat to get my protein number per day,
Hmm.
right?
I
And I
think
can
that's
I can
fair.
clearly check that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I do think that calories is part of the culture, and maybe that's not the best way to frame this because ultimately, when I said protein and fat, ultimately that's what the issue is. So I do think that how we frame these conversations is important. So maybe better to say, are you getting enough protein? Now, ultimately, getting enough protein will increase the calories of protein. So I do think framing may be helpful because if we use wording that then puts us back in the old paradigm, that's probably not going to be helpful for people who are moving away. It's all about framing, right? So it's definitely not more calories. It would be enough fat and protein to signal satiety and make sure we're full. Um, Making sure fat is high enough to make sure our hormones are working optimally. So I do think I agree with you that framing is important. And it's just something I need to be thoughtful about as I have these conversations, because I'm still, I still live in a calorie world when it comes to my health system and the world I live in outside of this YouTube space. but but I do think that framing matters, because it's all about, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about how we think and our brain and how we react to the world. And I think that's important. So I appreciate that.
It kind of leads into the second thing that I wanted to say, which is that the way that we think today is about band-aids, because we've been
Hmm.
taught that. So we're always putting a band-aid on. But if ultimately our body is asking for protein and fat when we're hungry, then this thing we do where we give it carbohydrates, if that happens to in the moment alleviate an issue that I'm having, it's still a band-aid. And I feel
Hmm.
like there's this thing where I do want us to understand that if you're in the keto world, you're in the keto world. And so therefore you will be eating these things and then moderating and managing and like, paying attention to how much of what I'm having and how that impacts how I feel. Perfect. But I always get afraid of people going to the next level before they're ready. Like my number one thing is that when you go from standard diet to keto, be ready. Because when you're trying to live in both worlds, now you're doing high fat, high sugar, bad idea. But the same thing happens over here. Like if you step over to carnivore, but then you're jumping back and forth, well, your body has gone to a new level, and you jumping back is an insult to the body.
Hmm.
And I don't think we take that seriously enough.
Hmm.
And that little bit of sugar is not all of a sudden a large amount of sugar if you've been doing
Hmm.
carnivore long enough.
Yeah.
And the chasing is back in and I've seen so many people where this happens because they're not letting themselves understand that if I've been away from the toxin for a very long period of time, when I bring it back, my body's reacting like it's the first time I ever touched it.
Well, it's everything has shifted. And if I were to make it personal,
Hmm.
I, as a person with irritable bowel, I was noticing, and a lot of people have shared this, that when I have a moment of indulgence and I eat the things that uh, I've gotten away from, my stomach can't tolerate that. Now, when I did my research on that, it suggested that the microbiome has shifted, not in a bad way. And that's what they'll tell you. Say, well, your microbiome is not diverse. Well, I don't care about diversity. I just care about a gut that's happy. And ultimately, my gut was happy. However, if my gut has shifted to a carnivore gut microbiome that helps me process amino acids and fats, when I introduce the starchy, sugary foods that is not used to processing anymore, there's no microbiome in there to deal with that. So ultimately, I find that people who move away from the things that harm them and then they go back to those things, the body reacts aggressively. So I've learned, now I'm blessed because I have a stomach problem. So I'm not gonna, you know, I'm going to be less likely to go back to the wrong things because I know there's a price to pay that I'm going to feel within 24 hours, if not sooner. Where the other person may feel nothing initially, and then all of a sudden, a day or two later, or maybe their blood sugars are spiking, whatever it is, they're going to maybe not have that immediate like thing to tell them, don't do that. So for me, I think people need to understand that it is better to stay in your lane and to be more consistent because your body has told you that this is where it's optimal. But people struggle because we're surrounded. We got the holidays coming up and people feel I'm just going to have a little bit of this and that, not to mention all the other things like, how it's going to trigger you and maybe get you back on that roller coaster on the wrong dietary pattern. So I agree with you that people should probably do their best to stay in a lane that's going to keep them healed.
And I want to lean in on that word indulgence too, because we're calling it an indulgence when it's resuming to eat the toxin
Yeah.
that we took out of our body because it was harming us. And to your point, like you're lucky you have stomach issues. I'm lucky I have joint issues. Feel
Right.
that immediately. But for those people who aren't feeling it immediately, it's an internal organ thing, maybe it's an internal blood pressure or like, right, so you're not feeling it immediately, but it's even more dangerous. And I feel like we're encouraged to not see how serious that is right? If
Mm-hmm.
the plaquing on my heart resumes, like that's a huge deal. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
small thing for this indulgence that we're having. So again, I'm saying this out loud because I want to just
Yeah.
push a little bit on this idea. And I feel like you're resonating with what we're like, you're saying the same thing. And people need to understand what they're risking.
Yeah. Everybody's like, I'm a very meet people where they are person while trying to advocate for what I feel is best, right? So you may assume that if I have a normal relationship with food, and although I did improve when I made these dietary changes, it's possible that person could have an indulgence and not be triggered. But then you have the probably the majority, because most people come to these dietary patterns because they've struggled, right? And in that group of folk, it's probably best to avoid as much as possible. And then you ask yourself, if I have a keto friendly indulgence or a carnivore. So we made carnivore bread yesterday, and the carnivore bread includes I think it was butter, eggs, pork panko, which is pork skins ground up, and I think it was sour cream, right? So all of those technically are carnivore foods, but then you have this bread, right? And then the question is, although the ingredients are okay, is that then going to be okay? Now, when I eat that, I feel nothing. It feels like I'm eating carnivore, but it's psychologically, is that a good idea? And the answer is, I'm not sure yet, because I've only done this maybe 2 or 3 times. Because we in our house, it's like, ribeye. My wife has a non-starchy vegetable. I'm just eating the ribeye, or something along those lines. But those are and I'm doing this primarily for her, where I can say, well, I can make something that's carnivore friendly, but it's also going to give us some variety, and that kind of keeps the variety in the home. When you have a keto home, mostly I'm the only carnivore in the home, so that's kind of why I'm kind of toting that line. But I also know they have a lot of keto products for those who are keto that are just garbage. And I just think people have to be really careful when they're toting that line. You have to look in the mirror and say to yourself, "Is this really the best decision for me?" And if you're gonna do it, it should be a Maria Emmerich carnivore recipe that kind of reminds you of the other foods, but you got to make sure that psychologically you're okay. That's kind of how I deal with it in my clinical setting.
Okay, so and I the way that I deal with it is I try to encourage people to look at why they want that thing in the first
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
So it's like it's one of those things where I still feel our society very much pushes this idea of variety.
Hmm.
But when you look at other animals in the wild, they're not looking for variety. They're looking for an animal to eat, or they're looking for the plant that they eat.
That's right.
And I think that this is part of the game that we play, but it's okay. I think one step at a time. What I will say, at least for the journeys that I've myself had, and the ones that I help people to have, one thing that I've noticed is that as you progress and feel better, so when your body is feeling amazing, you don't care as much about the variety. It falls away
Oh,
because you start to understand the main point is feeling good. And then you get lots of positives from the activities that you're having with and that you're doing and the people that you're engaging with, that your body works when you go out to do stuff,
mhm.
that you're sleeping better, that you're thinking more clear. So all of that stuff I think starts to trump the fun food on the plate, but you need to let yourself get there. And I think
I That's 100% where I'm at. As a guy with irritable bowel who never thought I would have a normal stomach, I never thought it was going to be possible to go into a place and not ask where the bathroom is first. I never thought I would go months and not have episodes of cramping, diarrhea, uh, all the bloating that comes with irritable bowel. And then I get to carnivore diet, which is why I went all the way to that extreme. And my belly feels normal. I don't realize I have a stomach anymore. I don't notice it. But whenever I push that envelope, and I, even if I do a carnivore friendly alternative to the traditional animal protein, there's always risk, because like if I make if I make a cheesecake that's mostly just dairy, fat, technically carnivore, do I then add monk fruit? Can I tolerate monk fruit? And the answer is ideally, I probably would avoid the monk fruit as well. Because what I'll do is, I tolerate like, I don't know, vanilla flavor or extract, those types of things for whatever reason, no issues, right? For me. But, or lemon to make the cheesecake taste lemony. But those things don't bother me. And the dairy doesn't bother me personally. But man, if I put a sweetener in there, if I do a Dr. Kilt's ice cream and I put a sweetener in there, that little bitty thing can really. I did a keto chow packet, which was flavored. I was just kind of experimenting with it as opposed to the plain, which is what I typically do if I take it, right? And within an hour or two, I was in the bathroom. My body just cannot tolerate. I think maybe it has Splenda. I don't know if it's stevia, Splenda, whatever was in there, I didn't tolerate. So I just think we have to be really careful. And to your point, I never thought it was possible to feel this good. I just never thought it was possible. So why would I then want to go back? Because sometimes our memory is short. And we just think it's just like a person who has bipolar, right? They're doing well on their meds and they're thinking, I'm good. And then they say, I don't need my meds anymore. And then they stop their meds. For those who have to take it, Dr. Georgia E can, for a percentage, they don't even need meds because she's amazing and you can use your diet to heal mentally. But just imagine, you know, us doing what that person with bipolar did. We assumed we were fine. And now you're on a manic episode. This recently happened to a patient of mine. They thought they were okay and they're not okay. So it's just nice to not risk so much because you thought you were okay. And what got you here is because you weren't okay. So let's stay in this lane where we're playing it safe. And that to me, that's a better way to deal with this.
I definitely think that that's a good point, that we sometimes feel like I'm good and therefore I can do some more. But to your point of like, so today's conversation is really, we're talking about the cramps and like all these different things. And I feel like the cramps is an interesting, our body has adjusted
Mm-hmm.
and now we need to make some micro movements to help our body with this new space. And we contrast this with this other thing where we feel great and we reintroduce something. And I feel like what you're helping me to see today is that we're never really finished doing our experiments. There's always going to be
Right.
something else to pay attention to, not only
Always.
because our body is constantly changing. And so even if I get my cramps under control with everything you've told me today, next year something else might show itself because just because I'm getting older and like real actual life is happening.
That's right.
But the flip side of the coin is the North Star should be eat healthy. And I
That's right.
feel like that's what I want to come out of this conversation. While we're eating healthy, there are ways to manage our cramps that don't
Right.
involve reintroducing carbohydrates, which is the
That's right.
number one thing that people keep saying they've been told. And I want to bust that myth. And I'm so
Mm.
glad that you busted it.
Well, let me bust
That's,
it some more. Can I bust it some more?
yeah,
Um, and what I mean by busting some more, let's kind of give people a reminder of what we're saying. So start with electrolytes. So if your sodium is the number one, Dr. Eric Westman would argue that's the most important. That's why you got to be generous. So I mentioned like 4 to 7 grams of sodium. That's literally 2 to 3 teaspoons of salt a day added to your diet. That's not the American Heart Association recommendation. They're like at no, I mean they're at much lower numbers. They're at like 1 to 2 grams per day. That's number one. And then throughout the day, because you don't want to just load it all at the same time, that would be a problem. You want to throughout the day maybe have a chicken broth. It's like your coffee, your teacup. You just have a little chicken, a salty broth. Some people do electrolytes, so that's. And if you're athletic and you're working out like I'm trying to do more regularly, that would be another way to go. Now, magnesium's the next thing. Magnesium, you can get it. We talked about ways to get it in your diet, but you can also supplement. I think glycinate is tolerated GI wise. That's probably the first one you go to if you have constipation, citrate, etc. And then we talked about potassium via ruminants, which you can't mess with too much, but the avocado, leafy greens, and things like that can be helpful. And then I think in your case, you're gonna try the sardines. The other thing I'll add is taurine as a supplement, 1 to 3 grams a day. Some people do better with that as a supplement. Some people do better with B1 vitamin, 100. I think it's 100 to 200 milligrams a day. And also just make sure your iron's okay. Make sure your vitamin D is okay. So I would check those, and if those things are off, hydration, hydration, hydration. And when you're in a moment of struggle, now here's the fun part, and you've probably heard this before, Violet. We love pickle juice. Now that's not carnivore, but if you haven't heard about pickle juice, 1 to 2 ounces of that, and you put it in your mouth and swish it around, swish it around, swish it around. That actually can work immediately. Yellow mustard, 1 to 2 teaspoons, can work immediately, and they both work by activating. There's something in your mouth called TRP, and TRP channels will stimulate and dampen the neuronal firing. And that when you do that, the cramps abort within 60 to 120 seconds or so. How cool is that? So if you keep little packets of pickle juice or mustard near you, because when you're in the bed upstairs and you're cramping, you need something right in that moment, right? You also want to dorsiflex your foot, because if you dorsiflex your foot, that's going to help the cramp. You want to take some deep, slow breaths and things like that. Wall stretches, of course. Massage, if you have a partner there that can help that, that's helpful. So those are the things I wanted to kind of wrap up with, because I think people want to walk away with, what can I do in the moment when things are hitting me, while building up the foundation of the right electrolytes, et cetera, because it's going to take time for you to figure out what your body needs. But that's kind of how I would approach it. And that's worked wonderfully for me and my wife as well.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much for coming. Is there anything that you want to point people towards for yourself?
I'm just trying to get the message out. I am part of the American Diabetes Society with Dr. Kim Berry, Dr. I can't, my brain's just like losing my mind right now, but I think the American Diabetes Society is a great website to get meal plans and things like that. I think that's really important. The YouTube channel, of course, is a great place to hear. I try to throw out a video as often as possible, 5 a week or so. And I just want people to continue to learn. And what I'm trying to do is make videos that answer questions just like today. So if somebody's struggling, what should they do? I have a video coming out talking about the A1C and how it can go up a little bit, but why does it go up? And it doesn't go up for bad reasons. It goes up because your hemoglobin's living longer, but not just because it's living longer. There's a way to correct for the fact that if it lives longer, it's going to hold on to more glucose because it's hanging around longer. But that elevation is fake news. So those types of videos, when people say, "Oh, my doctor's nervous about my A1C because I'm carnivore," and I'm saying, actually, when you do the equation to correct for it, it'll show your A1C is actually lower than it was. It's actually better. So those are the things that we're going to solve for, so people can at least have confidence to walk this walk without fear.
That's excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I can't wait till we have another conversation because I'm going to have you back.
Thank you. I can't wait to come back. Thank you.